This is The Week on Word, a podcast featuring a roundup of the most interesting, informative, and entertaining interviews from Word Radio. You can listen to Word anytime, anywhere at WURDradio.com and the Word Radio app. Give us a play and download it today. In this episode, Meg Berlin, organizer of the No Kings Coalition March, spoke with Wake Up With WURD host about the demonstrations, anti-Trump focus, and its push to stop the Senate bill threatening major cuts to Medicaid and food assistance for millions. And attorney Keir Bradford-Grey, head of civil rights litigation at Marrone Law Firm, appeared on Evening WURDs to unpack a Philadelphia Inquirer report on warrantless GPS surveillance of teens. But first, Leah Litman, author and law professor at the University of Michigan, joined Dr. James Peterson on Evening WURDs to discuss the Supreme Court's increasingly conservative leanings and her view that the political system selectively protects certain groups.
Super excited to welcome my next guest, Professor Leah Litman, law professor at University of Michigan, former Supreme Court clerk, and author of the new book, Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. Just dropped on May 15th. Professor Litman, welcome to Evening WURDs.
Thanks for having me.
This book is amazing. I'm still working my way through it, but it's so important. Just to give you a little context here on Evening WURDs, we cover and talk about the Supreme Court regularly over the years. And it's interesting. Before we dive in, I will say, before reading your work, I've often think about the Supreme Court as man, this is like a 6'3" conservative court. It's stacked with all of these kind of conservative ideologues. And it is that. But it's more than that, in the sense that these are conservative ideologues that have a penchant for engaging these weird oligarchical sort of theories in people, but also it's more than just a bunch of conservatives on a court. It's something that really distinguishes this court, I think, in the history of the Supreme Court. And Professor Litman, if you don't mind, I kind of want to start in the middle of the work, because there are a couple of chapters that are going to be really, I think, important to our listeners. And that's chapters 3 and 4 of this work. I want to go right to what I have highlighted here. Chapter 3 is all about the Voting Rights Act and the gutting of it, the removal of pre-clearance, but also just giving us a lot of history. Now, I'm also a big fan of Game of Thrones. And so
this chapter is for you.
Yes, this chapter is for me. I don't know if my listening audience is, but talk to us a little bit about the history of the VRA that you're cataloging here. And also for folks who maybe have not watched Game of Thrones as much as I have, help us understand why that's such an apt metaphor for what you're working through in terms of what's happened to the Voting Rights Act.
Yes. So the Voting Rights Act, of course, is really the crown jewel of the civil rights movement, passed in 1965 after the Bloody Selma March, during which peaceful civil rights protesters, were beaten and arrested by Southern and state and local officials who were waiting for them, across the bridge. Mm-hmm. And after that Bloody Selma March, Congress passes the Voting Rights Act, and it has always had two key provisions. One is what's known as Section 2, and that's just a nationwide ban on voter discrimination everywhere. Mm-hmm. And then there was also Section 5, which was known as the pre-clearance process. And that required certain states with especially egregious histories of voter discrimination to obtain permission of the federal government before changing their voting laws or policies, to basically prevent them from changing up the rules so close to an election and conducting an election according to these invalid rules without courts having to roll them back. Mm-hmm. So the Republican Party around that time was undergoing a realignment between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party decided their move, or at least a move, was to target the white conservative voters in the South who opposed the Voting Rights Act. So they started catering to that group of voters in part by digging in to opposition to the Voting Rights Act. And they continuously opposed the reauthorization of Section 5, the preclearance process, throughout the Nixon administration, the Reagan administration. And then by the time of the second administration, they kind of given up opposing the Voting Rights Act, at least in the space of electoral politics. But at the same time, they are trying unsuccessfully to oppose the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. They are appointing a bunch of judges and trying to appoint justices who they think will strike down the Voting Rights Act, because they know they can't do that in electoral politics. And so you have Richard Nixon literally trying to cultivate support from Southern segregationists by promising to appoint justices who would, quote, not treat the South like a whipping boy on civil rights. And he's referring to the Voting Rights Act. This is not subtle. And so he manages to appoint 2 justices who vote to strike down the Voting Rights Act. Ronald Reagan elevates one of them to Chief Justice, William Rehnquist. And then William Rehnquist, together with other Republican appointees, order the state of Florida in 2000 in Bush versus Gore to certify Bush as the winner of the election. John Roberts becomes a Chief Justice, and then he writes the opinion that strikes down
Professor
the
Litman,
clearance process.
So I'm going to need you to give us that chain again, so that folks can, because this is really important. So the way that this shows up in the Black community is that every several years there's like a conspiracy theory that circulates, like, hey, they're going to take away the right to vote for Black people. The problem with that being conspiracy theory is that people don't recognize the kernel of truth that you just articulated, that there were people actually trying to remove preclearance, right? There were people actually trying to work to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. So it exists in the kind of the public popular imagination within the Black community as this conspiracy thing. Oh, these strange guys in back rooms are going to try to take away the right to vote. It is that, but because it circulates as a conspiracy theory, never really returned. But there is a direct link between Nixon, Rehnquist, and Roberts that you detail in this book that ends up removing preclearance. Please just help us, give us that train one more time, please.
Yes. Okay. So first, it's not a conspiracy theory if they're actually out to get you. But what happens is Nixon opposes the Voting Rights Act, but he is unsuccessful in doing so. And so he promises to appoint justices who would attack the Voting Rights Act in the courts. One of those justices is William Rehnquist. He also promises to appoint a Southerner to the Supreme Court to try to cultivate support from the segregationists in the South. That justice is Lewis Powell. So keep those names in mind, because I'm going to come back to them. So fast forward to the Reagan administration. During the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan appoints William Rehnquist, who's then an associate justice, as Chief Justice. By that point, he has voted to strike down the Voting Rights Act. So that's the person Ronald Reagan wanted as Chief Justice. At the time, there is a young lawyer in the Reagan administration who's named John Roberts. And John Roberts clerked for William Rehnquist. And while he is a lawyer in the Reagan administration, John Roberts writes memo after memo outlining the Reagan administration's opposition to expanding the Voting Rights Act. Again, they are unsuccessful at blocking the passage of an expanded Voting Rights Act in Congress because the public likes democracy. They like voting rights. So then what happens? Well, then John Roberts becomes part of the campaign legal team for George Bush. And when the 2000 election comes down to Florida, he helps George Bush convince the Supreme Court, at the time led by William Rehnquist, to stop the recount in Florida, order Florida to certify Bush as the winner of the election, which they do, and he becomes president. Who does Bush first name to the Supreme Court? John Roberts.
John Roberts.
He becomes a Chief Justice, and he authors the opinion that strikes down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the preclearance process.
This is stunning. So one, the voters who ultimately are disenfranchised in the 2000 election in Florida are largely Black voters.
Yes.
Right. We know that now. It's hard. It was a lot going on in the moment. I mean, folks sensed that at the time. But essentially, when you stop that count at that point, that recount at that point, the votes that are left on the table are Black votes.
Yes.
In an election, a presidential election, again, by a fraction of a fraction of the electorate. That's a dark moment in American electoral history, particularly for Black folks who pay attention and study these things closely. But then the idea that it's the same John Roberts who now has erased preclearance. And I have skimmed the opinion that Chief Justice Roberts had about that. Can you help us understand what was he? He was essentially saying that we don't need pre-clearance anymore, or that these states or these municipalities are responsible. I'm trying to honestly understand, like, what was his legal rationale for removing pre-clearance?
Yeah, so he says really three things. And one is what you alluded to, which is we don't need pre-clearance anymore because the country has so changed dramatically that we are past the point where we would need pre-clearance. Now, keep in mind that things have changed dramatically in part because of the Voting Rights Act, because of pre-clearance, which he conveniently overlooked.
Leaves out of the opinion, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And in fact, he was largely proved wrong when, after the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act, many states previously subject to pre-clearance all of a sudden rammed through a bunch of voting restrictions, which disproportionately disadvantage voters of color and Black voters in particular.
Ending early voting, ending souls to polls, absentee ballot, trying to get
food and water
ID,
at the polls.
Food and water at the poll, all the things immediately.
Yeah.
And so it's like they planned it. But again, it's this, what's scarier than that trajectory, although that's a very scary trajectory, Professor Litman, what's scarier than that is that the Republican Party now is committed to using the courts to do the things they cannot do through legislation.
Exactly. Yes. And they are not done with this project because at the Supreme Court this term is a case they will release an opinion in before the end of June. And this is a challenge to what remains of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2. And this is a case about whether Section 2 will continue to require states to afford Black voters the opportunity, the political opportunity, to elect the candidate of their choice. Because right now, the Voting Rights Act requires states to consider race when they are drawing districts, and in particular to ensure that minority voters, again, are represented in districts where they have political power.
So they're not disenfranchised through gerrymandering or other antics.
Exactly. So they are not split up into different districts where they can never actually elect a representative. And right now, a group of white voters is challenging a state that tried to draw districts in ways that would ensure Black voters had opportunities to elect.
That's Louisiana. Yeah.
Yes.
Professor Litman, so I want to go back a little bit and give a little history for this, because one thing the book is great about, all this is great about giving us incisive, accessible history lessons that help us understand. And I'll just also be honest with you, I've read a bunch of Supreme Court kind of legal stuff over the last couple of years, and a lot of authors, and I'm not throwing any shade here, but a lot of authors shy away from hard conversations about race. Lawless does not do that. Right. And so you give some historical sense about redemption. People talk about Reconstruction all the time, but they don't talk about redemption and the lost cause. And some of that is what animates the ideology that we see happening in a place like Louisiana right now. So give us that little bit of history lesson about redemption and the lost cause, and why that drives some of the kind of white conservative moves that are being made extra legislatively.
So redemption was this movement that basically coincided with Reconstruction, and it was the anti-Reconstruction. It sought to end Reconstruction and redeem the South in the eyes of the country so that they could reinstate their stranglehold on political power. And it sought to do so by minimizing the role that slavery and racism played in the Civil War. So that's how this idea of the lost cause movement comes in. The idea is that the South fought for this lost cause, something other than slavery. We'll call it federalism or states' rights or anything else that wouldn't be as ugly as the institution of slavery. And so the movement of redemption basically creeps in to the Supreme Court, and they assist in dismantling Reconstruction. So they strike down the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which prohibited racial discrimination in businesses that serve the public. And they did so by embracing one of the false narratives of redemption, which is that civil rights protections for the Black community actually unfairly discriminated against white people by not allowing them to engage in discrimination. So that was literally the logic that the court engaged in to strike down part of Reconstruction and really begin the successful takeover, the retakeover of the country, by segregationists, and pave the way for Jim Crow. And to my mind, you see that same logic in the current constitutional challenge to the Voting Rights Act. And you saw it in Shelby County. The idea was it's the poor Confederacy who is being victimized by these civil rights laws. And it is unconstitutional discrimination against white people to ensure political opportunities for historically disadvantaged racial minorities. And so it's those threads that I identify in Redemption that I think you can see echoes today in the continued attacks on the Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely. I see those same echoes in all the anti-DEI executive orders. Yes. I see those same echoes in all these lawsuits that are trying to use anti-discrimination laws that are on the books to claim that white men are being discriminated against in venture capital funding or in other things. I mean, it's important for us to know that history. Before we move on to the money chapter, I just want to make sure that we understand what the perilous future is of the Voting Rights Act. So you're saying they're going to the fifth clause is on the chopping block for the Supreme Court. Is that in this cycle this summer, or is that coming up after that?
So they are currently holding a case, and they are going to decide it by the end of June about whether Section 2 will continue to offer protections for Black voters as far as being allowed to be in districts where they can elect the candidate of their choice. So this case could represent really the first wave of attacks on what remains of the Voting Rights Act.
Wow, we will be paying close attention to that this summer, for sure. So I mean, in the There's Always Money in America chapter, there's an excerpt here that stands out. I want to read it for you and then ask you a quick question. You write, although the United States was founded without a monarchy or entrenched aristocracy, it has a long history of almost fetishizing the notion of a ruling class. There's a sense that some people are going to be more powerful than others, perhaps because they just deserve to be more powerful and have the power to shape other people's lives. That feeling helps explain some of the trajectory of the federal courts because of the justices' affinity for power and the powerful. The justices help build a system where the court is a little more equal than the other branches of government. This is supposed to be a democracy. There's supposed to be checks and balances. But when you ask people in America, like, about the monarchy, I have friends who love the English monarchy. I'm like, why do you care about it? Why do you love it so much? And they'll tell you some story about, they followed Diana, who, by the way, was a humanitarian. Yes. she was not a raging oligarch or a raging plutocrat. She was a humanitarian. They followed her and then they just fell in love with the monarchy. But why you talk about vibes in the book. Why the hell are Supreme Court justices vibing so much with the oligarchs and the broligarchs of the world?
I think it's a difficult question to answer. I think this is partially a story about the Republican Party, which decided to cater to wealthy interests and corporate interests. And so they selected justices who they believed would be sympathetic to those interests. There was actually a memo, again, they always seem to write this down, by Lewis Powell, one of Richard Nixon's Supreme Court nominees, written when he was commissioned by Philip Morris, the tobacco company, to write about how corporations could push back against regulations. And he wrote that it was no exaggeration to say that the most forgotten man in American politics was the corporate executive. So the Republic, yeah, I know.
With a straight face?
With a straight face.
Therein lies Citizens United. Exactly.
And so it was based on this strategy that they appealed to plutocrats and oligarchs, and they helped them fund a campaign that would help them identify justices who would be sympathetic to those plutocratic oligarchic interests. And once on the Supreme Court, those justices are patted on the back and feted with gifts and largesse by those same plutocratic oligarchic interests that they are ruling for.
Is it? But I mean, they're getting vacations. They're flying in private planes and riding on yachts. I mean, are they being enriched in other ways that we can't see? Or is that enough for them to ruin the democracy?
I think that's probably enough, but hard to say what we don't know about. I mean, we know, for example, that Justice Clarence Thomas has appeared at donor events for the Koch network, where his appearance was part of the prize that they purchased when they were giving money to the Koch Foundation and Koch affiliated entities. So it is possible that there are other shenanigans going on that we don't know about, but what we do know about, I think, is already troubling enough.
You know, I say that people, my listening audience is going to be really sick of me saying this, but I say this all the time. We try to raise these alarms when Clinton was running for president against Trump, to get folks to think about the Supreme Court. There were lots of folks who were saying, hey, this is going to have an impact like for way beyond this particular moment. We're seeing some of that unfold in this Trump 2.0 era. But a couple of things. I'm worried about the future. We have a few minutes left here, Professor. So I want to just talk about the future now. And I don't know if you write about this in the book or not. Do we need to be trying to push for adding Supreme Court justices here? Like what are some of the ways that we can reclaim the United States Supreme Court for American democracy?
So at the end of the book, I talk about how we have to build a movement that would be designed to democratize our institutions, including the Supreme Court. I do think that adding seats to the Supreme Court is at this point a necessity, but I don't think that can be the only solution to the Supreme Court. I think we should also restrain the court's powers. I think, as you were quoting from the book, the court has given itself more and more authority, and we need to subject it to some political oversight by the people. I think term limits would be helpful. I think ethical rules would be great. And
how about that? Ethical rules for Supreme Court justices.
Exactly. And limiting the authority of the court to strike down laws like the Voting Rights Act. I think all of these reforms can and should be on the table.
So how many more justices should be added? Is it 3? Is it 6? I mean,
at this point, I think we have to add enough justices so that there is a majority of Supreme Court justices who believe in democracy. At this point, that requires adding 4 to right now. But that might change.
Do you understand how sad it is to hear a scholar of your stature say that there are Supreme Court justices who just don't believe in democracy?
Well, I mean, think about some of the questions that were asked in the oral argument in Shelby County. There you had Justice Antonin Scalia say, if these politicians vote against the Voting Rights Act, they're going to lose an election, as if that's a problem. But when politicians do things voters don't like, they are voted out of office. That is democracy. Democracy is not a problem, and they are treating it as such. And I think that is a ginormous red flag.
It is one. In term limits, is it 12 years, 20 years? What makes sense from a jurisprudence perspective?
Yeah, so I think that it should be a number of years where the terms are staggered such that each president gets, let's say, 1 to 2 appointments. I think that probably means somewhere between 14 to 18 years. I think anything more than that, you start getting justices who become a little too accustomed to the lifestyle of a Supreme Court justice in ways that have proven to be problematic.
We're out of time. I have one more question. Earlier on in the book, you talk about a concept that comes up a lot from these justices, as well as like political pundits and political activists and think tankers who claim that they're originalists, right? They claim that they're either originalists or they're constitutionalists, which I think what they mean is that we want like the original interpretation of the Constitution. Talk about what that ideology actually means, particularly like post-Scalia.
Yeah, so originalism, actually, its origin stories go back to Brown versus Board of Education. It starts getting trotted out as a challenge to Brown versus Board of Education. People argued that the court had gone wrong by diverging from the original intent of the founders. It was also trotted out as a way of opposing Roe versus Wade and trying to use the federal courts to advance the social policies of the Reagan administration. But as a methodology, originalism is helpful at taking away hard-fought rights by groups that have not always been included in the American political process, because it directs courts to ask, well, what were the laws on the books at the time the Constitution was drafted and ratified in the 1700s and 1800s when women couldn't vote, racial minorities couldn't vote, and so no surprise, the laws did not regard them as full and equal citizens with complete rights.
Unbelievable. Extraordinary work. Professor Leah Litman, author of Lawless, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes, out right now. Folks, you should definitely pick it up. It is an extraordinary read. Professor Litman, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Are you doing any book talks in the Philadelphia area coming up so we can tell folks about it? Unfortunately, not right now. But if I do, I'll be sure to let you know. Please do. You got my producer's information, or your people have my people's information. Please let us know. We'll let folks know if you're in the area. But thank you for the work, Professor Litman. Really, it's a great read, and it's a really important book for where we are right now in the United States. You're listening to The Week on Word. You know that WURD is more than just a radio station. We are a voice, a platform, and a movement for our community. Right now, we need your support. This June, Word Radio has a goal to raise $20,000. If you value what we do, bringing you real conversations, accurate information, and community connections, then show your support today. Help us reach our $20,000 goal by June 30th. Make a contribution at wordradio.com/support. You can make a one-time gift or recurring monthly contribution at any amount. Word Radio is for the community and in the community.
This is The Week on Word, a podcast highlighting the top conversations on Word Radio. Make sure you look for and follow WURD Radio on social media. Up next, Meg Berlin, organizer of the No Kings Coalition March, on Wake Up With WURD with Solomon Jones.
Joining us now is Meg Berlin. She is from Indivisible, PA, and one of the organizers of this weekend's No Kings March. Meg, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. So, what is the reason for this march?
Okay. Well, why we're doing it is because the great mass of Americans oppose Trump and his policies. So, in Philadelphia, we're going to have the march here so that there's no confrontation that the White House can use, so that there's no confusion about whether this is support for his parade or not. So that's why we're in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And we're protesting his policies, which hurt just about everyone except the richest Americans.
Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at some of the reporting on the protests that are going to be happening in 50 states, not just here in Philadelphia. And They talk about the parade and some of that coverage. Where is your group on him having this parade on his birthday and also on the anniversary of the U.S. Army?
Well, we think that a military parade is completely inappropriate for a democracy. We've never had a military parade. We don't celebrate war. We celebrate people. Mm-hmm. And it's a ridiculous expense. It's almost $50 million. The money that's spent on the parade could have paid for medical coverage for thousands of veterans. But he seems to think that, it's going to honor him. The terrible waste of taxpayer money.
So we're watching these policies take place, and you talked about medical coverage. One of the things that is on the table, and the House already passed this legislation, it's now in the Senate, Medicaid. Cutting Medicaid benefits for millions of Americans, and at the same time giving huge tax cuts to the richest among us.
Right.
Where are you on that, and what can we do about that other than or in addition to protesting?
Okay, well, protesting is effective. We can call our legislators. We can call Senator McCormick. We can call Senator Fetterman. You can call your congressman. And what they need to do is, in the Senate, they need to be slowing down this bill that's now in the Senate, as you say, passed by the House. Mm-hmm. They need to add amendments. They need to use whatever procedural tactics they have, and they have a lot of them, to slow it down so that everybody who is thinking maybe this bill will cut waste, fraud, and abuse, that's not what it's doing. It's cutting the meat of programs. It's cutting SNAP benefits for people who are hungry. It's cutting things for children. It's cutting things for people who need these things and giving, as you say, more money to billionaires. So what? So they can buy another yacht? It's completely wrong. It's unethical. It's immoral. It's absolutely wrong. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that the people who represent us in Washington know that we are watching, and there will be an election next year, and we will vote them out if they go along with this.
So we're talking with Meg Berlin. She is an organizer with Indivisible, PA. She is one of the people who's going to be there at the No Kings March, which is taking place this Saturday here in Philadelphia. It's one of numerous marches that are taking place around the country in opposition of Donald Trump's policies. You mentioned our senators, and one of them, of course, is John Fetterman. Many in the Democratic Party voted for John Fetterman because they saw him as a Democratic vote. And John Fetterman has been talking favorably about some of Donald Trump's policies since Donald Trump has come back into office. I wonder if your group has noticed that and how you feel about it.
Well, our group has certainly noticed it, and Indivisible Pennsylvania sent him a letter urging him to resign. We said, you're not doing your job. You're not. He doesn't go to committee meetings because he'd rather go home and put his children to bed. Well, if that's what he wanted to do, why did he run for senator? I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to put your children to bed. It's perfectly normal. But that's not the job of the senator. The job of the senator is to represent the people who sent you there. And many of us worked very hard to make sure he was elected. And there's a story in the Inquirer today where he is saying that Los Angeles is aflame. No, there was violence on one block in that city. That's it. So he doesn't do his homework. We're very angry about it. We feel he is not representing us well, and we would like to see him resign, because if he resigns, then Governor Shapiro could appoint his successor to fill out his time, and we would like to see that. So the head of Indivisible Philadelphia, Vicki Miller, and I tried to make an appointment with John Fetterman when we were in D.C., and instead of meeting with us, he went to Boston with Senator McCormick, the Republican senator, to talk on Fox News. Now tell me, how does that represent us?
You know, that was going to be my next question about the LA protests and about what Senator Fetterman said, because in addition to what you said, all of which was accurate, the Trump lawyers are now citing what John Fetterman said on X, formerly known as Twitter, about these protests, that they are chaos and that they are anarchy. And they're literally using John Fetterman's words to bolster their case for why they should have the military there confronting the American people as they protest. I
saw that. I saw Fetterman's post on X, and I actually replied. I think it was not on X. It was somewhere else.
Okay.
And I replied that, why didn't you talk to the mayor of Los Angeles before you assumed that was right? He didn't. And she was very clear about where the violence was. Yeah. Let me tell you that our march on Saturday is meant to be completely peaceful. We have done everything we can to ensure that this is peaceful. We don't give Trump any reason to send in the troops. We have worked with the police. They are fully on board. They know what we're doing. We communicate with them. We have the fire department. We have worked with the city. And every time somebody signs up, they know that this is to be a peaceful march. We do not want any kind of violence or disruption. We have, I think, 50 marshals. We will have security. We have worked very hard. In fact, we have Zooms that tell people how to de-escalate any conflict. So we are working as hard as we can to make sure that there is no violence, there is no disruption. The only thing that people can expect is a verbal and visual protest.
So that, of course, happening this Saturday. How can people get involved?
Easy. So you can go to nokings.org and sign up, and you'll get all the information. We will meet at Love Park at noon, and I believe we step off at 12:15 or 12:30, and we march all the way up to the Art Museum. And there will be speakers at the Art Museum, and we'll have broadcast. We have visual signs like TV screens, TV monitors for people to do that. And I hope that everybody listening to this program will join us in this peaceful but it's very important demonstration the Trump policies which hurt all of us.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you, Meg Berlin from Indivisible PA, for joining us on this morning show. You know, one of the things I think that has kind of come out of this is some division, I think, within those who oppose Donald Trump. I think voters of color felt kind of betrayed in terms of what happened in the election. And as a result, you know, many reluctant to be involved in protests. What would you say to those who are reluctant to be involved in these protests?
I would say that every person who thinks that their life has value should be protesting against what's happening in Trump's America. I think if you think that you have a right to medical care, if you have a right to not go hungry, if you think that you have a right to live your life the way you want to live, you should be protesting, because none of those things are what Trump's actions and policies do. He talks about making America great again. Certainly we have our flaws, but he is ruining everything that has gone before by these massive protests. Look what he's doing with immigrants. He takes people off the street with masked police. Masked. You're supposed to know who and why you're being arrested, and you're supposed to have the right to counsel. You're supposed to have a due process. None of that is being observed. This is a very dangerous time in the United States, and we have to do what we can to make it fairer, and your voice is the thing that will do it. Our voices are the things that will do it.
All right. Meg Berlin from Indivisible PA. She's one of the organizers for the No Kings March. I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning.
This is the Week on Word. Represent your favorite station in style. Look for Afrocentric tees, hoodies, tumblers, notebooks, mugs, and more. Just click the Shop tab at wordradio.com. Show the world that you're all about Black Talk Media.
You gotta look good.
You're listening to the Week on Word podcast. To learn more about our programming, simply visit wordradio.com. That's WURDradio.com. Our last conversation for this episode features attorney Keir Bradford-Grey in conversation with Dr. James Peterson on Evening WURDs.
You know, my next guest is one of my favorite guests to have on this program. Super excited to welcome back to Evening WURDs attorney Keir Bradford-Grey, the head of Marrone Law Firm's Civil Rights Litigation Department. Utilizing the depth of experience she earned as a trial attorney, Ms. Bradford-Grey provides an in-depth legal perspective to help resolve complex cases, drawing on her former role as chief defender of the Defender Association of Philadelphia. Ms. Bradford-Grey applies her skills of strategic process and negotiation to champion her clients for fair and equitable outcomes. Keir Bradford-Grey, welcome to Evening WURDs.
Hello, Dr. Peterson. It's so wonderful to see you and to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you on here. Great to have you on. Now, we covered a story earlier this week, and I want to help break this down for our listeners that exposed the fact that in Philadelphia, there's been an uptick in the use of GPS tracking devices for teens. It's becoming a little bit more conventional to use these devices. Now, I do want to be very fair that for lots of families, they would rather have their teen wearing this GPS tracking device than have them in a youth detention facility while things are being sorted out legally. So I want to make sure we acknowledge that piece of it, Attorney Bradford-Grey. But the flip side of it is that law enforcement is also now starting to use these devices to surveil other teens in the community. And I think that's where things are getting really fuzzy in terms of my understanding of the legal issues at play here. But I know you're familiar with this story. Can you help us understand like the history of this? When did they start using these ankle bracelets with GPS trackers in them?
So first of all, thank you for doing this story. I mean, this is what you just laid out is the appropriate complexity to this issue, right? So this started when we started to ask to close down some of these placement centers that were not doing right by our kids. They were inhumane treatment and inhumane facilities. And we were paying millions and millions of our tax dollars to send kids there to not get the rehabilitation that we wanted or the therapeutic session that we wanted. They were coming back sometimes in worse traumatized conditions than they went in. So we never got the benefit of our dollar for that. And two, these types of placements were being used for kids who are doing things like taking bikes. Those are wrong, but they weren't things that you would lock kids up for, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of nuance in this juvenile justice system, but to look at a kid in their individual needs is not just about the kid, but their circumstance, their family, the community that they live in. And so we started to see placements shutting down because it was unnecessary to keep certain kids in places when they had a home and they had a family and they had people now that would stay on them now that they knew what they were out there doing. But the reaction to the less placements were judges who felt like, oh my God, I don't have anything to do with this kid. I don't want my name in the paper should this kid be a kid and mess up in some way. Wow. And so now we need something so that we can say we're keeping people safe from these kids where, you know, we have the narratives in the papers and everywhere that kids are becoming more super violent and more super predatory. Look, I'm not trying to say that kids are not doing some crazy outlandish things with guns, but the vast majority of kids in the juvenile justice system are not kids that are out there shooting and robbing. They're kids that are out there committing minor stupid offenses.
Yep.
That's the vast majority. And they are now getting the residual effect of we have nothing else in our toolbox but these GPS monitors.
Wow. So I really do sympathize or empathize, I should say, with families who would rather have their young loved one with a GPS device on rather than in a facility. But you're also aware of the fact that Philadelphia is still one of the cities at the top of the list for incarcerating and sending its youth to these facilities. So it's not like the GPS tracking devices is staving off that data point, right? We're still putting too many of them in trial and trying to empathize with them. But then, like, what is it? Is it legal for law enforcement to use those devices to surveil other people that are not wearing the devices? Like, I don't even know exactly how that works.
Which is a great question, right? Is there some Bluetooth technology? Is it some, like the body cams? What's going on with these monitors? I don't know if they're able to look at what's going on by somebody wearing an ankle monitor. But they can definitely track your whereabouts, where you were. And if you do come in contact with another monitor, that can show too. Now, it's not constitutional to just have law enforcement looking into everything someone is doing. However, remember the 13th, when someone is under a justice system process, they lose a lot more of their rights in terms of access into what they're doing. And I want to take a step back though, because I said this, we closed a lot of the placements and a lot of the placements should have been closed.
Yes.
Now we have certain kids that are doing some things that are pretty violent. We got to figure out, why are you behaving that way? But we have a lot of kids that are doing basic kid stuff, albeit things that need to be addressed, but they're doing basic kid stuff. And we're overusing these GPS monitors for kids who could be getting a lot more out of creating a better village of therapeutic supports or whatever that is, social activities, those types of things that need to be implemented in our city for these kids who really have had a hard time functioning in their own household or environment. And some of the things we have to realize, when you put a kid in the house on GPS monitoring during the summer, we're talking about a lot of homes that don't have air conditioning. We're talking about a lot of homes where it's already saturated with people because there's more than one person or more than one family living in a home. We're talking about a kid that doesn't have their own privacy. And so we're seeing a lot more violations of kids on GPS monitors because of these conditions where they're giving out these ankle monitors, but not really being aware of, can this kid survive in this environment with this GPS monitor? And is it necessary?
Right. Right.
You know,
that's what I need to understand. You know, it doesn't feel need based to me. And maybe I'm being naive here, Attorney Bradford-Grey, but like whatever happened to like sentencing children to like community service or do those things still exist? Like, you saying they don't know what to do with them? Well, why not give them 100 volunteer hours that they have to serve somewhere in the community? Like, it seems like it shouldn't be that complicated to develop some redemptive and restorative ways for young people who've made some bad decisions around petty crime, not violent crime, but petty crimes, to kind of get their mind focused on some things other than like running around doing crazy things and riding bikes and stealing cars or things of that nature. That's, again, like a lot of people be surprised, but a lot of this is like non-violent car theft, people joyriding in cars. There has to be some alternatives, I would think, that shouldn't be that complicated.
Right. I think people first need to understand the types of crimes that kids are committing to bring them into the juvenile justice system and what the vast majority is. Because when we look at the news, we think every kid is going crazy. There are some kids that are doing some things that are very concerning, and that has to be dealt with. I don't want that to be lost in this conversation. But we're talking about north of 75% of the kids in the juvenile justice system who are not committing violent crimes that are being treated with this confinement mechanism that I do think we can be much better as a city and offer far more rehabilitative pro-social options that kids can learn those behaviors and grow out of some of these negative behaviors. We just have to truly come to the table and pool our resources together to do that. But, you know, when you have... there's two different things too. When you have this surge of GPS monitors, because now kids are not abiding by my every command, which, you know, my kids don't abide by my every command either. I didn't slap a GPS monitor on them, although I do track their phone. But I will say, I mean, the type of things that we have to make sure that we're not creating a normalcy for. Right. We have to continue to monitor what we do and see, is it effective? But when we have all these GPS monitors, now we have a whole new wing of probation officers who are just there for GPS monitoring. So now we got to pay your salary, make sure you're state employed. So there's got to be a justification to use all of these things. Because if we don't use it, we're not going to get that budget item come next year.
That's right.
And that plays into this. And people think that that's just talk. It's real. You know, when you start hiring people, I'm not going to just get hired and get fired because you don't need me anymore because you're making more sense out of who you should have on GPS monitoring. But then we get to the police and using it for their surveillance. Look, there are things that police can subpoena when they have a direct understanding and awareness of probable cause that this person is involved in something. They can subpoena certain things on your monitoring. But just
so if there's a crime that occurs and they know that someone who has one of these trackers on them is close or at that scene of the crime, they can subpoena that to see exactly what's going on.
Yeah, if there's probable cause, right? And you've got to articulate probable cause, whatever that may be. And it will allow you to then get access to information that you need to either bring that probable cause to a full proceeding. But just to be asking or to say, hey, what's going on with these kids? I want to see and try. That to me is a violation of your constitutional rights. Even though you are in a juvenile justice system, you still have some rights. While they are somewhat diminished, they're not gone. And I do think we need to be vigilant talking about this, pushing this, to make sure that we are not letting what's happening in the federal government happen here in our city, where there is a total disregard for a process. And they
don't even know what habeas corpus means, Attorney Bradford-Grey, like literally.
I think they know. I just think they don't want it to be a thing. But habeas corpus is the thing that gives you the right to a process. If you want to do something to me, accuse me, put me through a process where you're going to prove it. And I mean, that still exists. And so, we got kids pre-trial that haven't been found adjudicated delinquent for anything. that are on these GPS monitors.
Really?
Yes, because they do it pre-trial.
See, again, I'm so torn about this. What you and I are having this conversation because we like freedom. We don't like surveillance, right?
Right.
What do we say? What's the message to the families who say like, hey, I want to have this option so my kid can come home instead of being in one of these facilities?
Look, I agree if there is a need, a real need for your child to have some kind of monitoring because for whatever reason, he's just not abiding by any rules,
like violent offenses, drug dealing offenses, or we can list out some offenses maybe.
Right. And it shouldn't just be offense based. It should be individual based, right? Because look, there can be a kid that did something here, but he's been, looked at and, over here for these things too, that just haven't caught up to him, right? Individually, we need to make sure that this kid is under some kind of monitoring. But that is an individual assessment. Nothing should be categorized just because of the charge. It should be, okay, you got this charge, but what else is going on with you? Who else is in the household? Are you even going to school? Have you missed 100 days of school? What is going on with you? Those should be the individualized questions to figure out, is there a need to put this type of confinement on a person? And I do think parents' input is important. Right? Parent, guardian, whoever is responsible for the youth is important. So you'll be surprised at how many parents come to court and say, I can't control them.
Right.
Everything I can do, that happens. And when that happens, now the judge has to make decisions. If you can't control your own child, now the courts have to do whatever they can to make sure that this kid is being surveilled or being monitored or behaving and abiding. Those things happen too. So I have to tell parents, look, you can't come in and say, I can't control them. You guys take them, because when they take them, they're going to do whatever they see fit. But if you have parents that are concerned that the kid may have gotten out of hand, now you're here, you know what's going on, and you will say, look, I will make sure these things happen so that there is no need for that, and I will stay in communication with the probation officer. That should be enough. Because this is, we're talking about human beings, right? We're really talking about kids who respond to discipline and structure once a parent knows what's going on with them, because I can't always say every parent knows what their kid is doing when they're at work.
That's right.
Until something happens, now you're aware and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, now I'm going to send you over to such and such's house after school because I can't leave you home alone.
Right. It's going to be a crazy weekend. As you know, Indivisible and 50501, along with other progressive organizations, have organized a nationwide No Kings protest, protesting Donald Trump and his policies, not just the anti-immigration, but all of his policies, all his executive orders, et cetera, et cetera. Over 1,800 demonstrations have been organized. They're all over Pennsylvania, but Philadelphia has been tagged as the flagship protest because they're gonna be outside of DC in Northern Virginia, but they're not going to be in DC because of Flag Day. There'll be tanks in the streets, and there literally will be tanks in the streets in DC. But so Philadelphia has been dubbed the kind of flagship site for these protests. First, let's talk a little bit about the civil rights issues and implications of this, because one, that's your expertise. But I'm also want to talk to our listeners about like knowing your rights and being safe when you're out there protesting, because we also learned this week that ICE agents will be ramping up their efforts in the city of Philadelphia over the next several days as well. So it feels, Keir, it feels like a powder keg. It does. Yeah.
Given what we've been seeing on the news and what's been happening in other states. And one of the things that I wanted to definitely say is that if we're able to have lawyers that are committed to being present, back in the day when there was protests, we would have lawyers that would get together to talk about how they would help people understand what they can do and what they can't do, but also watch and document things so that later in a proceeding, someone can testify as to an eyewitness testimony of what they saw, what happened, and what didn't happen. Look, it is simple. You can protest. That is your right. You cannot destroy property or other things, because that will then be a different type of crime. But when it comes to ICE, I don't feel like there's anyone that can protect you in the immediate moment right now. And I know that's scary for me to say. Quite frankly, based on what I'm seeing, an utter disregard of the law, an utter disregard of due process, and just looking at an individual, making educated guesses on whether or not they are, a person that's not born in this country or not, getting names wrong, getting information wrong, but still being able to lock them up, and now having to fight that fight after that person has been detained. This is truly where we are. And so I would have to caution people that if you are going to be out there and you do know that maybe your status is questionable, you may need to think about this. And I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but I'm being very practical and realistic. We do have a situation where Trump has deployed ICE in a way that we have never seen before in my lifetime. I can say that. And that means that he has allowed them to do whatever it takes by any means necessary to take people in who they suspect, I'm not even saying that are, who they suspect are here illegally, and then sort it out sometime later.
I mean, I know people are going to come out for No Kings this weekend, and I encourage folks to, if you feel it in your heart, you want to protest, you should do so. I know I feel it in my heart. I want folks to be safe out there, and obviously my status as an American citizen should not be questioned, right? But for those, I think it's important to note for those who may have some questions around that, they have to be extra vigilant, because it's not a mistake in timing here, Keir, that they are sending ICE out right around the time we're going to have essentially what's going to be the largest protest against this president in this second term. The estimates are floating around, but again, it's 1,800 sites organized across the country. I don't know how many in Pennsylvania, but there's multiple sites in Pennsylvania. So I'm just concerned. It just feels like, looking at what's happening in Los Angeles, the overreach of the federal government, it feels like this is like an inflection point for American civil rights. And
we are at an inflection point. We are at unprecedented times and unprecedented moments. And it's even hard for legal scholars to wrap their head around this, because we've always relied on the rule of law. And now we're seeing the rule of law be mischaracterized, misnarrated, and altogether ignored. And it just doesn't seem like the tenets of our American Constitution is being respected by the person in the highest position of our land. And I don't know how to feel about that. I think it's I want to say that I'm very bold and brazen, but it is very uncertain to me. And I really, really wish that I had a better conversation about what people can and cannot do. I'm always the one that's saying, no, you have every right to do this. You really do. But at this point, they're not fighting fair. So you're going to have to feel the pain a little bit to sort it out later. But I don't even know how much later that is, because we still got people that were picked up going to a volleyball practice that are still detained. Right. Speaking of detention, one of our headlines at the beginning of the show today, I don't know if you've seen this yet, but Senator Alex Padilla, the senator from California, goes to a press conference, Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. He asks a question. And he's being detained. He's being pushed out, pushed down to the floor, handcuffed. I mean, is that the country we live in now, Keir? Is that where we are now? It is our reality, and we have to recognize it for what it is. It is. And it can't last always, right? Because we're going to have to get smarter and stop burying our heads in the sand and acting as if voting doesn't matter, because it obviously does, okay? We're seeing congresswomen being now charged federally. Yes. Representative McIver out of New Jersey, indicted. She was indicted. And we saw with our own eyes what happened. And I'm like, I saw the video. Like, what are you talking? Tell me, explain it to me like I'm a cat, how she's impeding anybody moving through there. I don't know. Please, I slowed it down. I'm like, am I missing something? But this is the way things work. And people really think it should take more than this to be indicted for something as serious as she's facing, or it should take more than this to be sitting at a press conference and raising your hand to be arrested. But we're not there. We are in a different moment. And I do think if we have sat out because we were mad at people about Palestine, which we should be vigilant about Palestine, but if that made us sit out so that we have this, we have to rethink that.
Some of us were saying this during the election, Attorney Bradford-Grey. Some of us are saying it doesn't make sense to be a single issue voter in the moment that we are in. Mind you, has anything gotten better for the people of Palestine since this president took over?
It's gotten worse, not only there, but here. So we have felt doubly taxed by the, I would say, just by people saying, I'm not participating. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to need people so we don't have to keep taxing ourselves. Look, a lot of us did what we were supposed to do in November because we knew what could happen. And now we're having to come back out and do more and more and more. And we cannot wear our faithful people out. But we definitely have to stand vigilant in this moment.
Attorney Keir Bradford-Grey, thank you so much for taking time.
You're listening to The Week on Word.
Good morning. It's Solomon Jones, host of the hottest morning show on radio, Wake Up With WURD. Listen weekdays from 7 to 10 a.m. for laughter, for fun, for politics, for family, for more than you can imagine. Check it out every day, Monday through Friday. Wake Up With WURD on 96.1 FM, 900 AM, WURD.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Week on Word. Let's stay connected. Sign up for our newsletter and listen to us online at WURDradio.com and on the Word Radio app.